I must inform members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate. We can now proceed to the election of the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the chair must be a member of the government party. I am ready to receive motions for the chair. Monsieur Généreux.
I propose Joël Lightbound. Way to go! Québec team.
Il est proposé par Monsieur Généreux que
Mr. Généreux moves that Joël Lightbound be elected chair of the committee. Any other proposals? No?
Alors, pursuant to the House order of Thursday, November 25, 2021, I will now proceed to a recorded division unless we have consent, general consent. I'm seeing consent. I declare the motion carried and Joel Lightbound duly elected chair of the committee.
All right. Well, that was one of the easiest elections I've gone through thus far in my political career. Je veux vous remercier pour.
I would like to thank you for putting your trust in me and for electing me without opposition. As chair of this committee, I will try to be impartial, polite, courteous, and as much as possible to have dealings in good faith.
That's polite and respectful and even-handed. And I'll do this job with honor and most of the time enthusiasm. And I might make a few mistakes, so you've been warned. It's my first time chairing a committee, so I look forward to it. And thank you very much. Alors,
So I will now give the floor to the clerk to elect the vice chair.
Okay. Conformément à l'article 100.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
Nominee Michael Cram.
It is moved by Mr. Fast that Mr. Michael Cram be elected first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? All right. So shall I proceed to a recorded division, or does the committee have consent?
Consent.
I'm seeing consent. And I declare the motion carried and MP Michael Cram duly elected as first vice chair of the committee.
Hey.
Conformément à l'article.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the second vice chair must be a member of an opposition party other than the official opposition.
For the second vice chair.
Move Sébastien Lemire.
Il est proposé par
Brian Massé moves that Sébastien Lemire be elected second vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions?
None. Should we move to a recorded division, or do we have consent?
Consent.
Je déclare la motion adoptée.
I declare the motion carried. And Mr. Lemire is duly elected second vice chair.
Alors, sans plus tarder.
And so without further ado, now I would like to congratulate Michael and Sebastian for their election. Without further ado, there are a few little guidelines that need to be repeated because it is the first meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25, 2021. There are members attending today's meeting in person, but also remotely using the Zoom application. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and myself will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person.
Participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Compte tenu de la pandémie.
Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate via Zoom and not attend the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2 meters of physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their mask at all times, including when seated. Every person present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean surfaces such as the desk, chair, and microphone with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting with the best of my abilities and with the help of the House staff. I would like to thank members in advance. So thank you for your cooperation.
Suggest that as the next order of business that the committee now proceed to considering routine motion. In preparation for this, the committee clerk has circulated a list of routine motions that the committee adopted in the last parliamentary session. So with that, I would open the floor for the adoption of routine motions. Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to proceed to read into the record the routine motions. Analyst services, that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work. Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure, that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, the chair, 1 member from each recognized party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. Meeting without a quorum, that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence published when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition parties and 2 members of the government party, but when traveling outside of the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of the members present.
Okay, just
Time for
Mr. Fillmore. Just to be sure, if there are any objections to one or modification proposed to one of the motion that's being read into the record, please manifest yourself so we can debate it separately, so to speak. So, Mr. Fillmore, you may continue.
Thank you, Chair. Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. Mr. Chair, may I just ask you, Mr. Chair, in protocol, mask off for when speaking, or is it preferred to be on? Is there a position of that on the House, of the House?
I think the consensus from what I've seen in the House, and I guess the rules are similar in committee. If you're speaking, you can remove your mask.
Okay, thank you. Then if that's okay with everybody, that's what I'll do. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. That witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statement. That whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance. That at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there will be allocated 6 minutes for each questioner of each party as follows for the first round. Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes. Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes. New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
Je vois une intervention de Monsieur Lemire.
I see Mr. Lemire has raised his hand. Yes, quickly. During the last Parliament, we allowed witnesses to come in, and depending on the number of witnesses, if there were 6, we'd have 5 minutes, but if there were 4, then we could hear them for 7 minutes each. Could we remain flexible based on the number of witnesses, or should they all speak for only 5 minutes? I understand, based on information given me by the clerk, that this is at the discretion of the chair, and I'm open to proceeding, as you suggest, to provide as much time as possible to the witnesses who come before us. Thank you. Mr. Fillmore, you may proceed.
that this is document distribution we're up to now, that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, provided the documents are in both official languages, and that the witnesses be advised accordingly. Working meals, that the clerk of the committee, at the discretion of the chair, be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the for the committee and its subcommittees. Travel, accommodation, and living expenses of witnesses. That, if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives may be made at the discretion of the chair. Access to in-camera meetings. That unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff member at in-camera meetings, and that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present. Transcripts of in-camera meetings. That 1 copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee also have access to the in-camera transcripts. Notice of motion. That a 48-hour notice interpreted as 2 nights be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday, B, the motion be distributed to members in the offices of the whips of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour, C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when the committee is holding meetings outside the parliamentary precinct, no substantive motion may be moved. Orders of reference from the House respecting bills. That in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of any committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B, suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect of a given bill. And C, clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them. We're nearing the end, my friends. Technical tests for witnesses. That the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. Linguistic review. That all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, members' offices, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to the members. And that brings us to the close of the routine motions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fillmore.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Fillmore. Now, I'm looking for a consensus on the part of the members to accept that we vote in the motions as a whole. Do we consent? Yes, I move that we carry all these routine motions. And now I need, is there consensus to carry the motions, the routine motions as read? I see no objections, and no objections means that we all agree, so carried. Now I'm going to invite the analysts to introduce themselves and to speak to us briefly. Hello, I'm Mara Lemelin-Pelrose, and I will be your analyst on this committee. I have been with the committee for 4 years now. Scott Megart will also be with us. He has joined us by Zoom today, and he will be working closely with me. Speaking for the committee, I wish Ms. Belrose and Mr. McTaggart, thank you ahead of time for all the work that you carry out. Without the analysts, we would have a lot of difficulty proceeding.
Looking forward to working with you. Alors maintenant, bien, on est le plancher.
So now the floor is open for any motions, suggestions. Mr. Cram and then Mr. Lemire.
I look forward to working with you on this committee. I understand it's your first time chairing a committee, and it's also my first time being the vice chair of a committee. So I'm sure we'll learn this whole thing together. I would like to provide notice of one motion, which I will now read into the record, which I have also provided advanced copies to the clerk, and which he will be distributing now. So the motion reads as follows. That pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee undertake a study of, 1, how we can best protect Canada's national security by preventing the sale of critical mineral assets to hostile foreign interests. 2, how Canada can leverage the role that the critical minerals sector will play in driving our clean energy future by positioning Canada as a reliable and sustainable supplier of green technologies, including the development and manufacture of next-generation battery technology. And 3, how Canada can reduce its reliance on the vulnerability to foreign supply chains when it comes to the sourcing of critical minerals. And 4, how to protect and improve the competitiveness of Canada's critical minerals sector. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cram, for giving notice of that motion. I see that I have Mr. Lemire, Mr. Erskine-Smith, Mr. Massé, and then Madame Gray. Mr. Lemire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. We have received an interesting document which covered the work of the prior Parliament, and it had been mentioned rightly that 5 studies had been launched, had been undertaken. We had heard witnesses who had spoken on essential matters about the development of Canada and the development of Quebec. So I suggest that we be able to look back. We do have drafts of those studies. I would like us to have them adopted. I suggest that we not necessarily bring in witnesses anew. That might be worthwhile, but what I'm aiming for is to carry through on the studies that were undertaken. So basically, bring them back onto the floor, reactivate them in order to study the reports and present them in the House. So the national creation of a local vaccine from Canada, aerospatial sector, the economic recovery, the purchase of Shaw by Rogers, and the competitiveness of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. I now have Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Congratulations. So I agree with Sebastian. I think we do want to, where we've done the work from the last committee, Brian, Sebastian, and I think are the holdovers, and where we do have reports that we had already finalized as a matter of course as a committee, it would make sense that we bring them back online and have them, so at least the government is obligated to respond to them as we'd expected as a committee before the last election. So that all makes sense to me. I would say, though, it would probably make sense given the timeline where this is our first committee meeting and where, you know, a number of us could throw out ideas. I quite like the idea of studying critical minerals, and there are a range of considerations there, obviously, as our Conservative colleague laid out. But I do think it probably makes sense to spend some time, kick this to our agenda subcommittee, and we can hash out sort of a timeline. We can meet between now and Christmas, or we can meet certainly in January, and we informally, even as a starting point, just to go back and forth on some ideas, because I think there's going to be a lot of agreement as to where we want to go. I think there are lots of ideas in the last Parliament. We certainly had most of our work was unanimous, studying competition, studying the Rogers-Shaw deal, and studying competitiveness and affordability in the wireless and internet space. So I guess my suggestion would be, rather than tabling a series of motions today, if we kick the conversation over to the subcommittee, it probably will be more efficient for all of us. And then we can get going today and then get the work going as a subcommittee sooner than later.
Merci, Monsieur Erskine-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. Lemire, just to say, I believe that the clerk has received your motions. I think there might be a slight issue about the language you have provided them in, but I have on my list. Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Gray, Monsieur.
I have Mr. Massé, Ms. Gray, Mr. Fillmore, and Mr. Dong. Mr. Massé, the floor is yours.
And similar to that point, even if we don't get the final I guess, motion today from Mr. Lemire, if it needs to be worked on, even if we had cooperation to do that, it'd probably be helpful. I don't think it's time pending for today, but it would be good to get that work and commentary from the government on those subjects. There was pretty much, this committee has a history of working fairly efficiently, so would hope we could kind of extend that. I have a couple other small matters with that. And I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm looking for you for guidance because, like, I have a motion here today if we're going to go through motions or whether we're going to actually push this to a subcommittee. You know, it's really a style of I'm open to either situation here. So I'll just put on notice. I do have a motion for the auto sector. I can read that into the record right now briefly, that the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology hold immediate hearings on the state of the Canadian auto industry and to better understand plans by the government for investment in Canada's domestic auto industry, including greenfield and brownfield investments and investments in electric vehicles and battery plants. And that's actually to complement a study that was unanimously adopted at the International Trade Committee just a couple of days, yesterday, that was proposed by the Liberal Party and then supported by everybody else on that. So it would be like a small snapshot of our domestic industry given what's taking place in Washington right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. And I understand you've just read into the record, but will it be possible to send it to the clerk so that it can be circulated amongst members of the committee?
I'll do that, Mr. Chair. Normally I do have them, but with COVID, my staff was not able to come in today. Not that they're affected, but they have children they're taking care of that under a school thing. So normally I would have that, but I can up from the floor propose the motion as I've done. Thank you.
OK, j'ai Madame Gray.
I now have Ms. Gray.
Since it appears that the subcommittee will be discussing the different motions, I'll be really brief without getting into explanation, and I just have two to quickly read into the record here. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082, I'm providing notice of motion that the committee invite Daniel Therian, Privacy Commissioner of Canada, to testify regarding the development and ongoing operation of the ArriveCAN application. And then the second one would be also pursuant to Standing Order 1082. I'm providing notice of motion that the committee invite the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development, and the Minister of Rural Economic Development to appear before the committee at the earliest convenience on or before February 11th, 2022 to answer questions about the Prime Minister's mandate letters to them. That the ministers appear at the meeting exclusively for the purpose of the mandate letter and no other matters, and that this meeting be televised. And we do have copies here that we can pass on that have been translated as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. I have Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks, Chair. Just two things, but first, I want to make sure we're not falling into any procedural holes here. We are providing notices of motion today, right? We're not tabling motions? Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Just wanted to be sure of that. I wonder then, the second thing is, Mr. Massey, your motion regarding EVs and batteries is very interesting. It's substantially similar to a motion that the Liberal Party had prepared. And I wonder if I were to read it into the record to give notice of this motion, perhaps we might talk about combining them at subcommittee if you'd be willing. So I'll start with reading it in and see how that goes. Okay. That the committee recognize the importance, I beg your pardon, I'm going to scroll to the correct motion, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a comprehensive study on the potential for Canada to be a world leader in the production of critical minerals, particularly as it relates to the growing battery and EV ecosystem in Canada and across North America, that the committee examine how Indigenous communities can be active participants in this sector, that the committee devote a minimum of 2 meetings to this study and report its findings to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. I have Mr. Dong, followed by Mr. Lemire and Mr. Erskine-Smith. And then Mr. Fast. And Mr. Dong, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Chair, first of all, congratulations, and congratulations to the vice chairs as well. I look forward to work with all colleagues. This looks like a very interesting committee. I'm a new member to this committee. Let's collect all the ideas and proposals about different studies and head them towards the subcommittee to figure out an agenda. I'll need some time to digest on some of these notices, and as they're brilliant, good ideas, but new to me. So I would like to suggest these notice to be forwarded to the subcommittee for agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. My understanding from the room is that there is a consensus that we're putting notice of motions for the subcommittee then to discuss what should be the agenda of this committee going forward. So, yeah. I have Mr. Lemire, Mr. Erskine-Smith, and Mr. Fast.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dans le contexte...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the context of this committee, there was a proposal to divide our committee, one on research especially, and I see that there is an update which should be done because we also have research in our mandate. And I think the whole issue of innovation should be part of this. Perhaps you would think of what definition could be made of our committee and maybe include the word innovation in the name of our committee. And that sounds like very reasonable to me.
Bon, ben, je retire ce que j'ai dit.
So it seems that the clerk believes it is not possible to change the name of the committee. I can understand what the member wants, but the House cannot do so, even though this proposal seems very legitimate. This is why I suggested that we would think we could discuss to propose a change in our name to the House. Thank you. And Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Since we're all throwing out different ideas, the two that I would be interested in addition to the good ideas that others have thrown out, I do think we should have the CRTC chair in to speak with us for a meeting. I'm particularly interested in the complete reversal of their decision related to wholesale rates and its impact on affordability, but there are other things we could obviously discuss on that front. And given we've had Mr. Scott in previously to this committee, I think it would be good to have him in early on in this session for one day. It doesn't have to be part of a formal study per se, but just to speak to us about the ongoing work at the CRTC and the status of that work and delivering affordable wireless internet for Canadians, or the lack of affordable wireless internet at times. And the second piece being around the innovation agenda and the strategic innovation fund, and specifically the $8 billion net zero accelerator. It is within Minister Champagne's remit, and it would be quite interesting, I think, for us to look at as a matter of accountability, but also as a matter of, if we can constructively take a look at some of the innovation that is happening there. And lastly, just Chair, is there something formal that we need to, it's been great to hear different ideas from others. Do we need a formal motion to just sort of like formalize the kicking this over to the subcommittee, or because it appears to be on consensus, or are we good with that?
So it seems, Mr. Erskine-Smith, that we don't need the formal motion that there is consensus in the room for the subcommittee to work it out.
Perfect.
I have Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me begin by welcoming you to this position. As someone that occupied a similar position on the Justice Committee back when it was a minority conservative government, I know how challenging that can be. And I think you will find that if you are even-handed and understand that everyone at this table is working for the best interests of Canadians, that we'll get a lot done here. And that's my hope. When I speak of even-handedness, I think the occasion where you'll have the most difficulty is witnesses appearing who may want to run out the clock on their testimony. And given the fact that there are different interpretations that I've seen at different committees and also at the committee of the whole of the House as to how much time will be allocated to the questioner versus the witness, I'd be interested to hear at a future meeting, so to give you some time to ascertain what your position would be, exactly how you will handle witnesses that are trying to run out the clock. Will it be, if it's a 6-second question, will it be a 6-second answer? I know there are occasions when you're going to have to exercise a great degree of judgment and discretion, because if you ask the question, please describe to me the origins of life, that is a 5-second question. It may require 5 millennia to answer that question. So it does require great judgment on your part, and I hope you'll exercise that wise judgment. I do also have a number of motions I want to read into the record, if I might. There are 5, actually. The first one is as follows. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study on the national security risks posed by certain foreign telecommunications equipment providers, and that the committee call as witnesses the Ministers of Public Safety and Innovation, Science and Industry, and their officials, industry stakeholders, and telecommunications experts, and that not less than 3 meetings be dedicated to this study.
You can pursue, Mr. Fast. I just had a quick question.
The second one is as follows. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study on the most important issues impacting the competitiveness of the Canadian economy, with a special focus on 1, labor shortages across the country, 2, barriers to interprovincial trade, 3, supply chain constraints, and 4, red tape and burdensome regulation. My third motion is as follows. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study of accessibility and affordability of telecommunications services, that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the second session of the 43rd Parliament as part of its study on the subject be taken into consideration by the committee in the current session, that the committee adopt the report entitled Affordability and Accessibility of Telecommunications Services in Canada, Encouraging Competition to Finally Bridge the Digital Divide, which was adopted during the second sessions of the 43rd Parliament, and that pursuant to Order 109, the committee requests the government table a comprehensive response to the report and that the chair present that report to the House. The next addresses the issue of patents and patent boxes. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study of the benefits of implementing a patent box regime in Canada similar to the patent box approach adopted by the province of Quebec, with the goal of supporting our innovators, attracting investment to Canada, and developing, commercializing, and keeping innovation and related intellectual property in Canada, and that the study review Canada's historical business expenditures on research and development as a share of GDP. And finally, the following motion. That pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 2, the committee undertake a study of how to streamline and eliminate red tape around federal science, research, and economic development programs, that the study review Canada's historical business expenditures on research and development as a share of GDP, which have been well below the OECD average and have continued to fall since their peak in 2001, that the study include a review of the extensive costs that our innovators incur in hiring consultants and advisory firms to fill out and complete the copious paperwork for funding applications, and that the study focus on how science, research, and economic development funding can be invested directly into research without being diverted into a complex administrative system. And finally, one addition, Mr. Chair, if you might bear with me, very short one, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite relevant officials from Statistics Canada to study the latest inflation numbers, that this study consists of at least 2 meetings, and that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. And I make that motion given the fact that Statistics Canada reports to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fast. To your first point, I can assure you that I will do my utmost to be fair and even-handed. And as far as allocating time between witnesses and questioners, I'll take it under consideration, reflect on it during the holidays, probably go watch videos of the chair of the Justice Committee years past, see how he handled this, to seek guidance. And as for the notice of motions that have been given, I think there is already a lot for the subcommittee to reflect on and to work on to try to prioritize and come back with a plan to this committee. I would also suggest that members from the various parties here can send notices before the subcommittee meets, maybe in the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks. And that the subcommittee meets early in 2022 to, well, not too early, but fairly early, so that we can try to hash out a plan for this committee going forward. If that's agreeable to all, I think that would be a path forward that could work. Fine. So. So so then I guess there is nothing else in the agenda for this committee, and I see Mr. Généreux.
I don't know if you have time, because I think everybody wants to go back in the House to the presentation from the Minister of Finance, but it would be interesting to know each other more. So I don't know, maybe at the first meeting that we come back, we can present ourselves and saying who we are, from we're from, and how long we've been in the House, and so we can understand who we're dealing with as a partner here around the table.
I think we can certainly add that to the agenda, some introductions. And I'd like to thank you. I heard a lot of good things about this committee. I've heard there's a lot of collaboration, and I hope we will be able to continue on that. Meeting adjourned.